Oh, what's up, everybody? Let's see, this week in review. The week started out pretty great. It never ended up poorly or badly, but originally the first half of the week, so basically, I don't know, up until about Friday, I was down on track. Body weight was great, down to like 141 even, which was essentially linear progress. Refeed is Friday. It wasn't the best refeed I've had. For the higher carbs, I went with Hush Puppies, which was basically a craving I was having. Work feeds us free food on Fridays, so for the lunch we had barbecue, and I was like, well, I'll just grab some Hush Puppies. And either it was the sodium or it was the fact that throughout refeed and forward, I added quite a bit of fibrous vegetables, like a lot more broccoli I added to my diet just because I bought a bunch and it seemed like a great food. I mean, it is. Anyway, needless to say, weight spiked up from 141, which was Thursday and Friday morning, to 143.6-ish. And since Friday, it's been 143, 143, 143, through into check-in today, which is frustrating because now my check-in weight is much higher than it had been like for the last 4 weeks straight. Even with linear progress, it hasn't been 143 for like 3-4 weeks, I think. Anyway, so that's going to be frustrating with check-in, just to kind of talk about that, decide whether or not we want to drop a little bit of food, because basically show's coming up. Regardless, I want to make sure that that weight change is at least linear, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I'm not too worried about it. It's an upsetting thing. Visual changes have been all right. Some of you might have seen my posing from Strongman Saturday. Feeling pretty good about that. And you can see I was a little bit more full. I'm still not quite as full as I'll be when I get all my calories back. For those of you who aren't aware, full, meaning I've got more water in my muscles, more carbs in my muscles, rather than being really depleted of carbs and water in the muscle. So it's a different look. If you know, you know, rather. So anyway, that's what I've got going on for nutrition. Training-wise, everything's been pretty good. I mean, Strongman Saturday, I'm weak as shit, but I'm having fun just hanging out with the people, which is in a pretty elite driveway. I want to shout out to Kristen for getting her invite to OSG. It was great. It was cool to be able to be there and be one of the people recording for her online submission. So Masters World's Strongest Women. That'll be competing in Orlando in October, November. I'm not following that super closely, but around that time frame, I believe. So shout out to her for being badass. But we got a pretty elite team out there in the driveway, which is wild. But yeah, that's basically nutrition and training. Other than that, pretty much everything's been going pretty well. I'm able to go on walks more with Caitlin. She's recovered. She broke her arm, her left arm, a little bit back about a month ago now, and now she's got a removable brace. And because North Carolina heat is sweltering and humid, we haven't really been wanting to get that thing super fucking sweaty. So now that she can remove it and have like removable stuff to clean, we're able to go on walks, and that's awesome. That's one of the things we love doing. So yeah, that's kind of the most big stuff. Mood has been relatively fine. I've had some low days. I think the worst day was Thursday, right before refeed. I could tell basically everything was low and a bit of a struggle there. Predictions for this week: calories are going down. If I had to guess, I'm going to drop probably. I'm assuming I'm going to get back to 125 grams of carbs per week, or per day, not week, which will be a bit of a tough one to do, but I'll be able to get it done. I'm only a few weeks out, I think October 1st, first show. That's what I've got, so I'll just muscle through. Visual progress has been great, like I mentioned a little bit earlier. I'm starting to get the lines for the brachialis, separation in the bicep from the tricep, and then the secondary arm flexor that's underneath there. That's awesome. Lines in the glutes are starting to come in. I'm a long ways away from looking like there is no fat there, and that's fine. Like I said, I've got time. 5 minutes are up. Moving on to topics. First one I wanted to cover, Costin asked about how I can handle so many shows coming up. I don't know if I can, but bodybuilding is it's a long prep, and then you don't want to be in that lean window very long. So my approach this year was to blast as many in a row as I can. One misconception that a lot of people have is that I'm not eating anything that whole week leading up to a contest, so kind of like a weight cut or dehydrating. That's a pretty common thing. Fun fact, that's very likely not the procedure that I'll be going through. Historically, I haven't. From what I know of Cliff's work, there's basically, I'll be drinking a shit ton of water, like 1 to 2 gallons. Basically, for strongman athletes who are aware, or weight cutting people, it'll basically be water loading for many days without a taper at the end, basically to get used to draining any excess water for contest day without any intentional dehydration. The week though will be calorie neutral, so I'll be basically eating maintenance calories with a carb deplete. So it'll be high fat, high protein, probably with very low carbs and a shit ton of vegetables, basically just to deplete all the glycogen. Pretty common, not something we do in strongman for the most part. Anyway, so that'll be the first many days, and then I suspect I'll be doing a rapid backload, which I briefly described, which will then be still at roughly maintenance, probably a little bit above for the day before, which would be Friday, maybe Thursday, depending on how the process goes. I'll be loading a ton of carbs. Presumably, I'll be trying to fit in 1,100 to 1,400 grams of carbs those days. I think that's pretty much what I know of Cliff's rapid backload. Sodium and high potassium foods will be also there, but for the most part, it's going to be carbs and salt that are pretty big. But that all summary there, I won't be starving for that week. I won't be dehydrated for that week. It'll just be a lot of mental focus on what I'm eating, and that's going to be the highest cost. And I'll be doing that for 3 weeks straight. Then I'll have an off week, and then a vacation, which I'm going to try to be reasonable with my diet, and then come back in November and hopefully do a couple more shows. The Monday, or the second show I'm doing, the first show. I don't know why I said August. October 1st is an INBF amateur show. Hoping to do that one, and depending on how well I do on that one, we'll see if I need to do a bigger show in November to either try to go pro again or try to go for WNBF Worlds. See if I can qualify for that at a show up north somewhere. But we'll see how that goes. That's topic number 1. Topic number 2. Let's see. I don't know. I guess I'll talk about my training intensity. For the most part, balancing volume or intensity for the cut. I don't know if there's any solid information out there that actually researches it. I don't think SBS or Stronger by Science has mentioned any studies that are really out that have studied it specifically. I'm always looking for that information, but there's really just different approaches that people take. I kind of give myself 2 contingencies. So one, I give myself a reasonable amount of volume that isn't too far from my strongman training, mostly because I can stay within a reasonable amount of training for that. So that way, I mean, strongman has AMRAPs, so clean once, rep away for as many reps as you can do, which I don't know, can be 8, 15. Things like that, or with deadlift, if it's a car deadlift or an 18-inch deadlift, that could be like, I don't know, 20 reps. So I've got a lot of leeway in strongman for my volume landmarks. So I generally shoot for anywhere between 6 and 20. It's kind of a wide range, but it's a comfortable range for me. It's what I'm used to. Heavier compound movements, I generally err towards the 4 to 12 range. And then for most assistant stuff or supplemental work, things like that aren't basically a compound or vital movement or something that mimics a strongman movement, I'll generally have closer to 15 to the 20 range. And if it's like an isolation, like a deltoid, lateral raise or stuff like that. I just kind of push that towards 20, just because higher fatigue, it's a tiny muscle. I'm not going to load it very heavy for the most part. Lateral raises only get so hard. Then what are you going to do? Keep loading it? You're not. As far as intensity goes, generally I push everything about to 1 rep in reserve, or RPE9. I basically use reps in reserve in a sense of I maybe could do another up and maybe could do 2 more, or that's definitely the last rep I'm going to get. I generally stop at about that range for nearly all exercises, with the exception of overhead tricep. For some reason, I always go to failure on that. It shows up suddenly. It's kind of how triceps are, but that's where I go. What I recommend for most people is go to high intensities for you, but for the most part, for even strength outcomes and for hypertrophy outcomes, it seems pretty likely or pretty well response that you can get that growth or strength from leaving several reps in the tank or going all the way to failure. Kind of depends on what movement, kind of depends on, I hate saying depends, but I guess I'll go into what depends then. One of my pet peeves with listening to people talk about fitness is, well, the answer is it depends. If you can't say what it depends on, why bother talking? What it depends on. So, if your goal is maximum strength, for the most part, you're going to have to push that rep near failure at some point. That's going to be when you're needing to express the maximal strength outcomes close to a contest. So you're going to maybe reduce volume or reduce other variables, so that way you can spend more time in near full maxes or near absolute failure. So that way, one, you get the neurological adaptations towards that meet or contest, so that way you have the maximum practice, and specificity, essentially. So for basically nearing failure, or highest possible intensities, that's mostly what it depends on. Another thing it depends on is if you enjoy that training. If for some reason you might respond slightly better to staying a little bit further away from maximum intensities or near failure work, but you can't seem to bring yourself to ever do it, well, if you're not training because you don't enjoy it, that's going to be less useful to you than training how you enjoy. And then for basically hypertrophy, it seems pretty reasonable that you can train at almost any intensity, as long as you're getting as long as you're seeing results. It's hard to measure hypertrophy outcomes in short term, but for the most part, the recommendation for me at least is to be pushing weights that you seem are reasonably difficult. I don't know, anywhere from like 5 reps in reserve all the way to near failure. I wouldn't push everything to failure, mostly because there's some unknowns to that. There's probably not a huge increase in chance of injury unless, I don't know, you do something like stupid, but that's not a result of high intensity or near failure training. That's a result of either a mistake, a poor decision on continuing to go when you probably should have, not listening to your body correctly, maybe too many weeks in a row of just pushing limits. But needless to say, and that's kind of where I land on high intensity versus low intensity. But for the most part, I really think most people's general work could be done in lower intensities. When I was training for my American log record for Static Monsters, I had a day where I trained technique specifically at about 75% for basically one day I did that every week. Another day I trained at 85 to 90% intensity. So that way I had a little bit more volume under heavy loads to understand how that load felt. And then my third training day, which was the lowest volume, I did more sets, but I only did singles or doubles, working up to heavy weights. And I did that to basically near max for a couple weeks in a row, and then I would back off slightly, somewhat of a wave format for loading. And I pushed that pretty heavy. So training at multiple intensities for strength outcomes, that was great. And then between contests, I mean, I trained at like 60, 70% for most of the time before I did another heavy log. And I mean, I'm not the best log presser in the world. I'm not like a heavyweight pushing up threes, but for someone with lean body mass of like 136, I'm pushing 245 overhead. Obviously not right now, but needless to say, that might not work for everyone, but I train fine doing a variable amount of intensities across my training career. So there you go. Those are my topics. Bye.